My name is Audrey Miller, and for as long as I can remember, my family treated my existence like background noise, a hum in the room that they only noticed when it stopped. A few weeks back, I decided to run one final test, a quiet experiment to see if they'd ever actually tune in. I dropped a short, simple link into our family group chat. I told them I'd been selected for a prestigious national award for my work in city infrastructure. I mentioned the live broadcast would be happening on a Friday night and that it would mean the world to see them there, or at the very least, have them watch from home. I held my breath, watching that little typing bubble flicker like a dying candle. My sister, Chloe, was the first to strike. She sent a laughing emoji, calling it a stupid award for office nerds, and told me she'd already bought VIP passes for a massive stadium concert that same night. A second later, my mom, Martha, chimed in, saying how much Chloe needed to unwind. Then came my dad, Bill. He added the phrase that cut the deepest. "Don't get mad at us if we don't go. We're not the ones making this an optional errand." They treated my life's biggest achievement like a guilt trip I was forcing on them. I read those words until they blurred. I didn't fight back. I didn't explain the weight of the room or the millions who would be watching. I just smiled, typed "understood," and put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. That single, quiet click changed everything. Because while they were screaming lyrics at a concert, my face was filling every massive screen above their heads. Suddenly, 50,000 strangers knew who I was, long before my own blood ever bothered to care. Before I tell you exactly what they said when the reality hit them, I have to ask, what time is it for you right now? And where are you listening from? I'm curious to know how far this story has to travel to find people who actually show up. To truly grasp why that night at the arena was so explosive, you have to understand the social architecture of the Miller household. On paper, we were the quintessential American family living in a manicured suburban cul-de-sac. But inside those four walls, our roles were cast in stone long before I was old enough to even realize I was playing a part. I was the child who simply handled things, the quiet one teachers never had to worry about, the one who didn't make noise. My older sister, Chloe, was the sun that the rest of the family orbited around. If Chloe had a recital, a volleyball tournament, or even just a fleeting new obsession, the entire family calendar bent until it snapped just to accommodate her schedule. Then there was Jax, my younger brother, the permanent baby who could get away with almost anything as long as he kept the room laughing. My mother, Martha, used to joke to the neighbors that she was blessed with a star, a ghost, and a comic. She didn't mean to be overtly cruel, but that ghost label told me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. My father, Bill, would come home after 12-hour shifts ready to hang on every word Chloe said about her latest big drama. I realized early on that if I wanted even 5 minutes of his undivided attention, I'd have to wait until the Chloe show had finished its grand finale and the credits were rolling. It was a death by 1,000 tiny cuts. A science project I had poured my heart into would be pushed to the edge of the table because Chloe had a state championship trophy that needed the center spot. I'd try to share a grade, and my dad would just nod, mid-bite, before turning to ask about Chloe's practice. When Jax cracked a joke, everyone leaned in. When I spoke, it was the universal signal for everyone to go refill their drinks or clear the dinner plates. None of it was dramatic enough to scream about, but it was a series of quiet choices that taught me my news was always secondary. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete with Chloe's spotlight or Jax's antics. I became the invisible architect of our home. I was the one who reset the router before anyone noticed the internet was down. I ensured the permission slips were signed and sitting on the counter. I reminded my parents of medical appointments they would have otherwise missed entirely. The more responsible I became, the less they actually looked at me. They loved the results of my labor, but they never saw the daughter producing them. By high school, I was a utility function in my own home, only acknowledged when a teacher forced a conference to deliver the praise my parents wouldn't hear from me. I told myself I didn't need the light. I leaned into the only thing that was truly mine, solving the world's problems without ever needing a thank you. I found my way into emergency communications because it was the only place where my obsession with detail wasn't a burden. It was a weapon. I joined a specialized squad developing software for the city of Las Vegas, tools designed to claw back precious seconds from the clock when someone dials for help. My specific project was the routing engine. This wasn't just code. It was a living map that monitored traffic bottlenecks, real-time hospital capacity, and historical call volumes. It whispered to the dispatchers, telling them exactly where an ambulance needed to be before the caller even finished their first sentence. In a city where the neon never sleeps and the desert heat makes tempers flare, 3 seconds can be the razor's edge between a close call and a total tragedy. It's a world of life and death hidden behind rows of monitors, where the coffee is always cold and the stakes are always impossibly high. Most of my life's work lived in digital basements, hidden code repositories that no regular person would ever see or understand. I spent countless late nights, the kind where the moon is the only other thing awake, scrolling through sensor feeds and hunting for the minute glitches that could delay a crew by even a single block. When the system worked perfectly, there were no headlines and no standing ovations. A dispatcher's screen simply glowed with a clean, green recommendation. A crew reached the right door a moment faster, and a life kept moving forward. The first person who treated that invisible labor like more than just background noise was Dr. Evelyn Vance, our department director. She noticed that I didn't just handle the standard assignments. I actively volunteered for the ugly datasets, the messy, tangled cases that made other analysts' eyes glaze over in defeat. Instead of telling me to relax, she pulled me into high-level strategy meetings about system architecture and failure modes. Evelyn was the first person in my life to say, out loud, that my need to understand every single gear in the machine was a profound strength, not a social awkwardness. Under her mentorship, our project started as a quiet pilot program in one of the most congested parts of the city. After the software went live, the performance analytics didn't just move, they plunged in the right direction. We were reaching citizens nearly 4 minutes faster on average during the chaotic weekend rushes. Dispatchers started sending us short, handwritten notes after rough shifts, telling us they felt less helpless because the system gave them an edge they never had before. We read every message, fixed every bug, and rolled the system out quarter by quarter until our digital maps covered the entire valley. I didn't realize it then, but as I was building these digital lifelines for strangers, I was finally finding the voice my family had spent decades trying to mute. The official nomination for the award didn't even originate within the 4 walls of our office. It was sparked by a regional coordinator who had been quietly tracking our response times and the statistical dip in local fatalities. They had built these dense, colorful charts that proved our software wasn't just a tool la mot la chun. They sent that entire data packet to a national committee that hunts for the most disruptive breakthroughs in public safety. I had no idea my name was being whispered in those high-level circles until Evelyn Vance asked me to step into her glass-walled office one Tuesday afternoon. She closed the door with a click that sounded oddly final and told me the committee wanted to speak with the lead architect of the routing engine. All their data, she said with a proud smile, pointed directly at me. There would be a series of grueling interviews, deep-dive technical reviews, and a vetting process that made me feel like I was under a digital microscope. Most of the time, I heard about the progress secondhand, like echoes from a distant room. I felt that old, familiar urge to just shrug it all off. In my head, I was still just a girl in a dark room moving lines of code, playing a sophisticated game of pattern recognition. It was just work. It was just me doing the tedious things no one else had the patience to sit with for 14 hours a day. But Evelyn wouldn't let me hide in the shadows. She leaned across her mahogany desk and reminded me of the overnight shifts when the dashboards were glowing angry red. She reminded me of that one stubborn bug we stayed up 52 hours straight to kill, and the time a veteran dispatcher called our emergency line in literal tears because the new system had positioned a paramedic crew exactly where they needed to be 4 minutes before a heart stopped beating. If recognition was coming, she said, it wasn't because I was some math genius. It was because I refused to walk away from a human problem until it surrendered. That review process dragged on for nearly 8 months. The committee sent endless lists of questions that forced me to translate my algorithms into plain, human language. They wanted to see anonymized timelines of every call handled during our most chaotic holiday weekends. They wanted to know what it felt like for a mother to hear a siren several minutes earlier than expected. Back at the office, we just kept shipping updates and fixing incidents, trying to ignore the fact that my name was sitting on an agenda in a federal building thousands of miles away. When the official notification finally hit my inbox, I sat frozen for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. The seal of a major federal agency was embossed at the top of the digital page. I had been selected to receive a National Public Safety Innovation Award. The ceremony was to be a black tie gala in a sprawling downtown ballroom, recorded for a special broadcast honoring those who serve in the shadows. There was a section on security protocols, media interest, and a specific line about guests. Inside our building, the news spread like a digital wildfire. Colleagues I barely knew stopped by my desk with wide, stunned smiles and clumsy high fives. Someone actually printed the formal invitation and taped it to the breakroom fridge, right next to the expired lunch memos and coffee cleaning schedules. My team lead started joking about us all needing to practice our TV posture in case the cameras panned over our row. Evelyn just squeezed my shoulder, her eyes bright with a maternal sort of pride. She told me the award didn't change who I was. It just meant the world was finally being forced to see the woman who had been working in plain sight all along. But that night, sitting alone in my apartment with the invitation spread out like a map, the guest section stopped being a detail and started being a haunting ghost. You may invite up to 6 family members or close friends. I looked at those empty lines until the condensation on my water glass made a ring on the table. I could already see the empty velvet chairs in the front row. I could see my parents and Chloe under the fake neon glow of a tourist trap, totally oblivious to the fact that their ghost was about to become the center of a room. Part of me wanted to keep it a secret, to protect this win from their cold indifference. But a smaller, sharper part of me, the part that still remembered being 10 years old and ignored, wanted them to be there. I wanted them to see the truth, whether they understood the math or not. By the time the desert sky turned that deep, bruised purple, I had opened the family group chat. I wrote a careful, dignified invitation and hit send before my courage could evaporate into the dry night air. The night of the ceremony felt like a fever dream unfolding in slow motion. By 4 in the afternoon, I was in a high-rise hotel suite, standing as a silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling windows. A professional stylist worked in absolute silence, pinning the final hem of a floor-length emerald dress into place. The invite specified black tie formal, the kind of polished, architectural look I'd only ever seen on C-SPAN or at high-stakes galas. In the soft, amber glow of the room, the woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, someone people might actually stop and notice before the world moved on. Downstairs, the machinery of the event was in full gear. Security protocols, check-in kiosks, and thick glossy programs had transformed the lobby into a high-stakes labyrinth. Staff members in sleek black headsets glided between groups of dignitaries. Each person there represented a pillar of public safety, health, or infrastructure. My name sat in the heart of the program, wedged between veterans of the field. I moved through the scripted motions the organizers had taught us. I met the coordinator. I surrendered my phone while they verified my credentials. I posed for photos in front of a media interest banner crowded with government logos. I accepted a heavy badge with the word honoree etched in silver. A staffer led us into the grand ballroom. Cameras sat on silent tripods, lenses fixed on the stage. The room was breathtaking, a sea of round tables covered in white linen, each marked with an understated place card. A minimalist stage dominated the far wall, with 3 towering digital screens hanging like silent sentinels above the podium. I knew one of those screens would soon hold my face, and I knew exactly whose eyes would not be in the rows beneath it. Martha, Bill, and Chloe were elsewhere. My team from the department was already there, led by Evelyn. They were a cluster of familiar faces in a sea of strangers, squeezing my hand as I took my seat. When the category for emergency services was announced, the room went dark. A cinematic montage played on the overhead screens, showing sirens at midnight and the intricate glowing maps of our software. The narrator described a system that had rewritten the rules of survival. Then, my name was called. Walking to the stage felt like moving through deep water. I accepted the glass plaque, which felt heavy and cold, shaking a hand from a face I'd only seen on the news. I smiled for the flashes, but my mind was miles away. I was in a screaming crowd at a concert venue, where the arena screens were suddenly switching to a live newsfeed of this ceremony. I could almost feel the air go cold as Martha, Bill, and Chloe finally saw what they had chosen to miss. The gala ended not with a bang, but with the hollow, metallic clinking of silver being cleared and the hushed echoes of power players making their exits. I reclaimed my phone from the security station, and the second it reconnected to the network, the device felt like a live wire in my hand. It didn't just vibrate, it shrieked, a relentless, frantic pulse of notifications that stacked so fast the screen was just a blur of white banners. Most were expected congratulations from the National Committee, frantic emojis from my emergency communications team, and a link from Evelyn Vance showing a grainy screenshot of my face on the local news. But buried beneath the professional praise was a landslide of missed calls from 3 specific numbers. I opened our family group chat and scrolled past the silence of the last few days. The timestamps told a story of pure, panicked hypocrisy. The first wave hit exactly when the concert headliner would have been transitioning between sets. I saw my original invite sitting there, lonely and dismissed. Then, Chloe's text calling my work a stupid errand. And then the pivot. The tone didn't just shift. It did a violent U-turn. Martha's messages were breathless blocks of text about the arena screens. Apparently, during the intermission, a local heroes segment had broadcast my ceremony live to the entire stadium. "Audrey, your face is 50 feet tall," she wrote. "People are turning around and staring at us. Why didn't you tell us it was this big?" My father, Bill, followed with a note about how a complete stranger had asked if he was related to the Innovation Award winner on the screen. He said he'd never felt so proud, as if he'd been the one in the front row cheering me on all along. Chloe's texts were the shortest, clipped with artificial excitement, claiming she always knew I was a genius and was already planning a victory party for the weekend. It was a masterclass in toxic planning. They weren't reacting to my achievement. They were reacting to the social capital I had suddenly gained. They were performing pride for a crowd of strangers while I was sitting in a room they had refused to enter. For a fleeting second, that old, tired reflex flared up, the one that whispered I should just smooth it over, thank them, and pretend the hurt didn't exist. My thumbs hovered over the glass. I could almost hear myself apologizing for making it a big deal. Then, I looked at the glass plaque resting on the table next to my purse. It represented life and death decisions, thousands of hours perfecting a routing engine to improve response times, and a commitment to public safety that they had never bothered to understand. I didn't reply. I didn't send a heart. I simply locked the screen and watched the reflection of the city lights in the black glass. The music had stopped for them, but for the first time, I was the one holding the remote. The sun didn't bother asking for my permission before it spilled across the kitchen floor the next morning. I woke up to the low, insistent vibration of my phone on the nightstand, a sound that usually signaled a critical failure in the routing engine or a spike in citywide response times. But today, it was different. When I checked the screen, I saw a tidal wave of names I hadn't heard in nearly a decade, all layered beneath the glowing icon of the family chat. I didn't answer. I set the phone face down and let the aroma of brewing coffee fill the silence of my apartment, a silence I realized I was suddenly very protective of. The world outside was already moving. Media interest had pivoted from the gala itself to the woman behind the software. 2 local news desks had emailed my department, and a regional magazine was asking to film a day in the life segment at our operations center. My communications team at the office had sent over a briefing, reminding me that I was under no obligation to turn my private life into a public spectacle. But inside the family thread, a different kind of script was being written. Martha was already coordinating with the neighbors, wondering aloud which journalists would want to see the bedroom where I grew up. Bill was theorizing about how my disciplined upbringing was the secret sauce to my success. Chloe was busy drafting captions for childhood photos, trying to weave a narrative of sisterly support that had never existed. I sat at my table, the steam from my mug rising like a curtain. I realized that if I didn't speak now, they would rewrite my history until I didn't recognize myself in it. I opened the chat and began to type, my fingers steady. I didn't use anger. I used precision. I told them that while I acknowledged their excitement, I was setting a firm boundary. I stated clearly that I would not participate in any interviews focused on our home life, and I would not allow my childhood to be used as a backdrop for their sudden pride. I told them it was painful to watch them scramble for the scraps of a victory they had tried to starve only 48 hours prior. I didn't quote their stupid award texts. I didn't have to. The history was right there, a digital scar they were trying to paint over. The reaction was instantaneous. Martha fired back a wall of text, claiming I was overthinking and that they were just acting like any proud parents would. Bill's response was sharper, more defensive. He wrote that I had no right to tell him how to talk about his own daughter, and he didn't appreciate being made to feel like a villain on what should have been a family celebration. Chloe was the most aggressive, accusing me of being ungrateful and acting as if I had raised myself in a vacuum. Their words reached for me, trying to pull me back into the old cycle of guilt and explanation. But they felt thin. They sounded like echoes from a room I had already walked out of. I realized then that I didn't need to win the argument. I just needed to leave the conversation. I took a screenshot of the entire exchange, the dismissals followed by the demands, and saved it to a folder I'd never show anyone else. Then, I did something I should have done years ago. I clicked the settings icon and muted for a year every single one of their alerts. I did it for the group, and then I did it for them individually. I didn't block them, I just chose when, and if, I would ever listen again. Because I finally understood that distance is not cruelty. Sometimes, it's the only way to stay whole. The weeks that followed the gala weren't a victory lap. They were a quiet, surgical reset of my entire existence. At the emergency communications office, the award became a professional shorthand. New interns would join the team, and Dr. Evelyn Vance would point toward my desk not to show off the glass plaque, but to show them what happens when you refuse to let a problem beat you. I spent my days mentoring those who reminded me of that younger version of myself, the ghost girl who taught a computer to listen because she knew exactly what it felt like to be unheard. But inside that professional momentum, my personal life was being reconstructed around quieter, more intentional choices. I kept my phone number, but I removed the family thread from my primary home screen. It was like moving a heavy piece of furniture out of a room I no longer used. I spent my evenings with coworkers who had become real friends, people who knew exactly what the project had cost me and didn't need me to shrink my light just so they could feel comfortable. Occasionally, pieces of the old world would drift in like debris after a storm. A mutual acquaintance would mention that Martha had framed a news clipping and hung it in the living room, a trophy she hadn't earned for a daughter she didn't support. Or a neighbor from the cul-de-sac would message me saying my dad talked about me nonstop at neighborhood gatherings, always conveniently skipping the part where he chose a stadium over a ballroom. I read these secondhand updates the way one reads a weather report for a distant city they no longer plan to visit. The conditions there could no longer reach me unless I chose to step back into the rain. Chloe tried a different tactic. When she realized I wasn't biting in the group chat, she began posting old childhood photos of us online, tagging my professional account and writing long, performative captions about always believing in my little sister. I sent her one direct message, my first and last in months. I stated clearly that I did not want our relationship presented as a fantasy for her followers, and that if she continued to use my name to build her own brand, I would have our department's legal team intervene. The tags disappeared within an hour. That is what real consequences look like in my world. It's not a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. It's just a series of closed doors. Martha and Bill can brag to anyone who will listen, but they can no longer reach the woman they're talking about. Chloe can perform her nostalgia, but she cannot rewrite the night the music stopped. If there is any lesson in my journey, it's this. Public recognition does not heal private neglect. The real victory came when I stopped treating my family's attention like a prize I had to keep earning. You are allowed to draw your own lines. You are allowed to decide which invitations matter and which are just noise. You are allowed to walk away from people who only remember your worth when someone else spells it out for them on a screen. Because distance is not cruelty when it is the only thing keeping you whole. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it made you think about your own boundaries or the people who truly show up for you, take a moment after this video to check in with yourself. Value the ones who are there when the lights are off and there is no applause.